Okay, so it's a little after 9. Let's take that away. That was just your reminder that we're recording the meeting. We start more or less at 9 a.m. And you always have your ability to mute yourself, to change your name, to not use your video. So to the extent that you want to increase your privacy, please feel free to go ahead and do that. So welcome to our weekly office hour meeting for the Wayside Cleanup Program at MassDEP. So just a couple things to talk about before we get into your questions. One is the graphic in the back. You probably heard about the governor's 4-phase approach to reopening the state. And we're all trying to figure out what it means for us. DEP is in the same boat as all of you are awaiting more details. I really like the graphic. I wish I had done it myself. I'm kind of envious because it gives us structure to start filling in the detail. And while we're kind of eager to have that detail, I'm also comforted to know that they're putting thought and effort into it and not just rushing something out. But this gives an overview of how we're going to progress. I added the "You Are Here" button. That's not the official graphic there. I couldn't help myself. But we're on the verge, it seems, of beginning to open up next week, May 18th. And for DEP, while we don't have a lot of details, my expectations from what I've heard is that May 18th and May 19th and next week is going to look a lot like this week does, and that we are not rushing back into the office. The kind of working remotely has been successful, probably more successful than we expected, I think. And in the coming months, as we go through this phased approach, DEP is going to be taking kind of a thoughtful and measured approach, and we're not rushing back to get people in the office for the sake of getting people in the office. We'll be looking at the type of work that we do and kind of bringing back people either into the office or what's probably more likely at first, more of a field presence. Doing inspections, doing site visits that we've been putting off for the time, but only to the extent that we can do it safely and protecting not only the health of our staff, but protecting the health of the people that we'll be working with, the homeowners, our contractors, the LSP's staff, the responsible parties, anybody we'd be meeting with. So while we will be getting out into the field more as we start rolling this out, as the governor starts rolling this out, I expect that the transition back to what becomes the new normal in the graphic is going to be months in the coming. And I'm not sure in which of these industries state government falls and kind of which phase we would be returning to the new normal, but I think it's going to be a long and thoughtful and careful transition. And that's what we're preparing for. One of the things that kind of encourages me is that we're, as an agency, investing in more resources that will make telecommuting, doing work from home remotely, more effective. At the same time that we're also looking at procedures in our offices, everything from having wipes to wipe down the copying machines, to traffic patterns in the buildings, that sort of thing. So as people do begin coming back a little bit more and having some at least partial presence in the office, we'll be prepared and have the equipment and the resources in order to do that safely. So, more of the same, really, probably for some period of time. The other thing we want to talk about a little bit, oh, wait, before I leave that, I wanted to point out that this 4-phased approach, as we As there is more detail, there is a web page on mass.gov devoted to that. You know, Google reopening four-phase approach, Massachusetts, and it will get you there. It provides the graphic, and as there is more detail, I would expect that it would be posted on this page as well. The MassDEP information is on related. We collected all of our COVID-19 information on one page. You can get there if you just go to the DEP's webpage and click on the yellow banner up there. It will bring you to it. The waste site cleanup information is in here as well. We have our own page where we're collecting the guidance, the fact sheets, other interesting things, and of course the recordings of these video conference calls. So we've added a couple Q&As over the past week on kind of questions that we had received on this call and by email related to the filing of AULs with the registries and the safe disposal of PPE as we begin to go about our work. As we develop more answers to the questions that we're getting, they will continually be posted there. So you might not want, you don't have to wait for these meetings. There may be things showing up kind of on, hopefully, maybe on a daily basis, but periodically. I thought I had opened up. Liz, I had just opened up the waiting room so people can come in. I don't know if you keep reestablishing it. So the other questions that we got that we're struggling a little bit with, and eventually there'll be Q&As, probably more than one Q&A related to them, are questions that we received about fees and how this is, all of this delay in the executive orders and the COVID-19 lockdown will affect site fees. And you know, frankly, it's a lot more complicated than you first think, partly because of the no known ending to this. And before we start posting more definitive answers to the fee questions, we are interested in seeing within the next week how that four-phase approach is going to start being filled in. And I think what will be important is the kind of where the 21E site work fits into the overall kind of getting back to the new normal, and kind of being able to judge what our expectations for site work should be. Certainly in the initial phases, the current phase of the lockdown, you know, the guidance that we have out there and that we still fully support is during the lockdown, we certainly want people to focus on imminent hazards, time-critical work, and we expect those to still be addressed because those also pose risks to the health and to the environment that need to be done in the short term. But as the guidance says, the more routine submittals and more routine work that kind of can be put off a month, 2 months, 3 months, we encourage people to do that. And it's that kind of routine work that is being delayed can result in some deadlines being missed. One of the more obvious ones is the year one tier classification deadline, where as you go through that, if you don't tier classify, you know, if in an otherwise equal world where there isn't COVID, if you don't close out your site and you don't tier classify, you would automatically become a tier 1D site. And there are fee implications as well as other kind of enforcement implications to that. We hope we've been clear that we're not going to take enforcement actions for missing that. We're going to treat that as if that deadline were extended. Although you can also look at it, and maybe this is a better way of doing it, is that we've instituted an extended grace period so that when those documents are eventually submitted, when we can go back to work, the effect is the same as having met that deadline. and so extending that to the fees and kind of what would be owed to the department, it would then depend if, you know, when we all go back to work, instead of the year one anniversary, it's either close it out the site or tier classify, and that has, you know, monetary implications, a permanent solution fee or the eventual annual compliance fees, and that will have the same effect. It will be as if you met that deadline that occurred in the middle of this lockdown. So that's a relatively easy one, and what will be interesting will be to see how the phased approach and the kind of us and you going back to doing routine work, how we fit that into the expectations. And I expect that we'll be, when we see what the phased approach, more detail for that phased approach, we'll be modifying or supplementing the guidance that's already out there. And that will include some fee implications as well. So as we work through that, we'll be communicating that to you. I think our commissioner has stressed, you know, to us internally, you know, for us and our staff, and for our work with the outside world, is that we want to, you know, continue a lot of communication. We don't want to surprise anybody with anything, and that there will be a lot of lead time as we kind of evaluate the new conditions as they change and begin to make changes to policy and guidance and what our expectations are. So we're trying to be clear about what the expectations are. Right now, our expectations are that until we have more information from the governor, we're still in a lockdown mode where we are dealing with imminent hazards and time critical conditions, and everything else that can be delayed should be delayed. That will change. And as it changes, we'll try to let you know more. So I think that's all that I wanted to communicate directly. If we'll open it up, if you can unmute yourselves. And if you want to raise your hand electronically, or for those of us we can see, if you want to raise your hand and wave, the floor is yours.
Paul, this is Jim DeCoulos. Good morning, everyone.
Hey, Jim.
Paul, I don't know if you're aware, but last year, the LSPA Tech Practices Committee began an initiative to look at vapor intrusion and how building science is affecting VI. And we had a presentation in January of 2019 with Mark Cram from Vapor Safe out in California. His associate made a presentation to Waste Site Cleanup Advisory Committee meeting, and another one of our presenters was Chris Schaffner, who's a building science specialist. Then Isaac Anderson followed it up in April with a discussion on APUMs, and we've sort of been trying to develop some additional supplemental suggestions for LSPs to follow through tech practices. It seems to me that with what we're experiencing right now and these still unknown aerial transmissions of this virus, that there are going to be some things changing in the building science, and it may affect vapor intrusion. For instance, you know, people are going to be wanting to open up their office windows, and HVAC systems, the duct works are going to want, and tenants are going to want to clean their HVAC ducting and filters, making sure that the filters in their systems are properly changed. There's going to be a big focus here on protecting indoor air occupants from the virus. And it has some effects on building science and vapor intrusion, in that one of the things that we talked about, and I want to commend you for bringing up a need in the future for measuring pressure as part of the new, as part of a suggestion to alter APUM requirements. But pressure plays an important role here in buildings and how VI moves. And if people are opening windows to get fresh air and to avoid transmission of the virus, then it's going to affect how vapor, hazardous materials, and petroleum will migrate within building air spaces. And we're trying to deal with it at Tech Practices, but I just want to let the department know sort of what's on our radar and ask for any suggestions, or if the department has been considering it. There's a great person at the Harvard School of Public Health. His name is Joseph Allen. And Joe Allen, I've been following his Twitter feed. He's written a book. He's co-authored a book called Healthy Buildings. But he and a bunch of other people at the School of Public Health have been really focusing on this aerosol transmission. And I don't know, has the department been looking at this at all?
I have not heard yet that we've looked at it in any detail. There may be staff that are involved, particularly on a site-by-site basis, that have. But Brian Rodden had been doing work with Isaac, so I don't know if he has been following that as well. But he's since moved on to the Northeast region, so maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that, if buildings, the HVAC systems and how people interact inside buildings and how those controls are changed, it may impact the performance of SSDS systems. Yeah. That's what the concern is, and how effective both VI assessment and mitigation is going to be.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly start paying more attention and looking into it, but also working with you guys on it as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Jeff, you had raised your hand.
Thank you. Good morning,
Basically,
Paul.
I like that.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're well. Paul, my question has to do with public involvement.
Yep.
Which maybe the answer is implicit in the answer that you just gave about time critical. But as you know, at a PIP site, you need to put your document in a repository for the public comment period, and you need a public meeting, both of which are impossible right now. And even when they're not both impossible, as you alluded, at least one of them may not be preferable. Mm-hmm. And I can't read the answer about what the department is thinking about those things in the COVID policy, other than what you said, which is that you wouldn't expect anybody to be doing that, which is impossible right now. But are folks thinking about public involvement in the post-COVID era and how the regs might be changed on an emergency basis to allow for safe public involvement?
We have been giving a lot of thought to public involvement, at least partly because we have sites that where we would like to hold public meetings. We would want to have that interaction. So putting emergency reg changes aside, I think the repository and making documents available, I think still, we have been doing that through EDP and making documents available online. It's it's different from having it put in a public library where people can access it, but it is one way of making them available to people. So we've been making use of that, and certainly documents can be uploaded through EDP or made available through if some other mechanism electronically to people. We've been struggling with things like language translations, particularly if you're working in environmental justice communities and you're dealing with perhaps 2 or 3 different languages as well. We've been trying to work through that, getting documents translated, getting them posted in various languages online for sites, and looking at holding virtual public meetings. I know, taking it out of the site realm for regulations that are going out, and we need to have public hearings for them. The department is looking at using electronic mechanisms for doing that and holding virtual public hearings as well. So it's, I think eventually it's probably going to be some combination of maybe limited in person, but expanding the use of virtual resources.
Paul, can I follow up on the repository question?
Sure.
And I guess this comes to the COVID-19 enforcement discretion policy. If one has a PIP that requires one to put a hard copy of a document in a repository, and the repository is closed owing to the COVID crisis, is this a situation where if one put the document on eDEP and made some other provision for making it available online, the department would view that as equivalent to putting the document in the document repository?
So not having discussed that particular legal issue of kind of meeting the regulations, and Liz has a nice poker face on at the moment.
She always does.
I would think what we would be balancing and what we would be looking at is it essentially the equivalent amount of public communication, public outreach, and if I think the approach that we're taking is, if we're the easy route, in the normal times would be to put the document in the library or the repository and kind of let people fend for themselves in getting to it. I think what we feel for our own work is that lacking that, then we do have to put some extra effort into the outreach and to try and kind of, that it's not simple. The equivalent is not simply, we'll put it up on eDEP,
right,
and they'll find it. It's put it on eDEP or some other mechanism, and then do concerted effort to make it known, make alternative versions available if it's necessary. I mean, some people don't have that. Would you be willing, if people kind of called or wrote in, would you be willing to put it on a thumb drive and send it to them? Would you be willing to print out a copy or something? And kind of taking that extra effort to try to make the alternative versions as accessible, if not more accessible, than the repository. I think that's in general the approach that we've been taking for what we've been doing, and I think that's kind of to the extent that we would use enforcement discretion. I think that's the way we would look at it for somebody trying to fulfill PIP requirements. That is the effort there, and kind of what is the likelihood of the success of the effort? Overall, the public involvement requirements aren't there simply to be met. They are there to effectively communicate what's happening at the site and allow the public to have some meaningful input into that. And if that purpose is fulfilled, then I think the department would be less concerned about whether the details of the public involvement plan requirements were actually fulfilled to the T in this COVID state of emergency situation. So that I'm looking at the DEP people, and they are all nicely stone-faced. So I think that's the way that we would look at it, and we'll take that as a as a question for a Q&A to more specifically address. And our written answers may be different from my off the top of the head approach, but I think we would look at it as, is the goal and the purpose of the public involvement fulfilled?
I would just note that the provisions, the MCP provisions for amending a PIP, for modifying a PIP plan, which a responsible person actually has pretty broad ability to do, as long as they put the modification out for public comment and address the public comments. Unfortunately, the first step in the modification of a PIP is putting the modification in the public repository. So we do have a situation here where there might be modifications to public involvement requirements that the department and a responsible person would agree are appropriate in the current circumstance and the circumstance for the foreseeable future. But the regulations, because nobody anticipated a time when it wouldn't be safe to go to the library for an extended period of time, don't really allow for it. So I would just encourage us to look at those provisions and see what could be done in the way of guidance, emergency regulation, permanent regulation to bring the PIP requirements into the modern era. Yep. Thank you very much for your thoughts, though.
Yeah. One thing about the kind of, in the long term, your potential changes to the regulation is something that we can certainly put on the table. We're the law in 2014 we made, as you know, changes to the to allow more flexibility in modifying the PIP plans, partly because of the changes in that were going on in general in accessibility of electronic formats and alternative ways of doing it. This takes it a couple steps further, but as for emergency regs, that's a lot easier to say than it is to do, particularly where there's competing. It comes down to competing for attention for kind of all the people that need to approve and participate in that process. So if there is a bias towards dealing with things through enforcement discretion and that kind of flexibility, rather than trying to create a bunch of emergency regulations to deal with very specific things. But it's a possibility we'll keep in mind. But just want to say it's that's not our first option to do emergency regs.
Jeff, this is Elliot Steinberg. Can you hear me?
Hey, Elliot.
How are you?
Good.
I'm involved with a PIP site on the North Shore. I guess it's part of the North Shore. And we had contacted, there are 2 public libraries that are designated as the repositories, and they are receiving mail. So we were planning to provide the reports to them. Nonetheless, the public doesn't have access to them, but that would at least satisfy that we've put them in the repository. And we've been sort of trying to figure out how to hold the public meetings on these reports. I heard that there's a site in Cambridge that's going to hold a Zoom meeting. I mean, have there been any successful virtual public meetings yet?
So Paul, do you mind if I respond to that?
Sure.
So on the Zoom public meeting, which is explicitly authorized by the governor's executive order, but unfortunately the governor's executive order applies only to public meetings under the state public meeting law. So my read of the executive order is that it doesn't authorize a virtual meeting other than a state public meeting if there's a regulation that's more specific, which the MCP is. So I think that, Paul, whether it's by guidance or a Q&A, the department can provide comfort on that, but at least as I read the executive order and the MCP now, that would be a liberty that one couldn't take under the public involvement provisions. On the library thing, Elliot, it seems to come back to what Paul was saying, because I had been considering that same possibility, just sending it to the library and it'll sit wherever the library's mail goes. But that seems to not satisfy Paul's reasonable expression of department interest, which is that the public actually have involvement.
I like the idea of providing them, if they've requested either a bound copy or a thumb drive with the report.
Right, and that could be in the note, that could be in the public note.
Yeah.
When you give your public notice that you're putting it in the repository.
I would recommend also reaching out to the primary petitioner and explaining the situation and see if they had ideas of alternative repositories that would be accessible to the PIP group.
Okay. That's a good idea. We have the luxury of, they requested that we send them notice by email in addition to the letter. So we have an email list of all the petitioners, so we will have contact with them, separate from the mail.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay. It's really the intent of reaching out and getting their input. That's sort of the measure.
Yeah.
That's the measure. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other issues? Questions, observations?
Paul, this is Linda Siegel.
Hey, Linda.
Hi, I was going to respond to the questions about the PIP, since that's been a personal experience that I've had in the town of Wayland on several sites. Each community, each municipality seems to be handling the COVID situation probably slightly differently, but why not also contact whoever the CEO is perceived to be in a community, whether it's the town administrator's office or the town manager or the mayor, and let them know as well. I don't see a downside in that. Of course, I don't have the legal hat that Jeff has, but if you're going to try to contact all the PIP participants, why not also contact whoever is perceived as the head of that community from a governmental perspective, because they're stakeholders as well. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think that falls into the kind of trading off the accessibility of the repository with kind of extra efforts to communicate with the public, whether it's coordinating with the primary petitioner and working with them, or the local other local groups. The Board of Health may be interested and involved. It may be a town manager as well. One of the things that we're going to be doing, I think I talked about it last week, is we're doing a Board of Selectmen meeting with the town, and it will be on cable access. So not only will it be streamed live on the internet, it will be recorded and made available later, but it will also be on local cable access TV. Kind of all is kind of above and beyond what might normally be happening. And it's the amount of outreach and kind of talking with people. And I think at this point, most people are looking for ways of managing the process, in consideration of COVID. And hopefully you're not running into situations where people are kind of digging in the heels about particular procedural issues, and everybody is focusing on is the purpose actually being fulfilled. And so far we've been finding, I think people are being pretty flexible and understanding and kind of working with us. I hope you're finding the same thing. All right, any other questions? Any of the regional staff, the DRDs, want to kind of comment on things you've seen in the last week or issues you're dealing with? No. Steve?
No, I just wanted to say, rather than just be silent, I just wanted to say, wait, I don't have anything noteworthy at this point.
Okay. You know, as we're going back to work, we have noticed that things like getting masks and gloves and equipment does seem to be getting easier. The EPA just gave us about 30,000 and maybe as high as 60,000 masks to distribute to wastewater treatment plant operators and public water system operators to ensure that that infrastructure keeps running and running in a safe manner. We've had a couple of towns where they're down to the bare bones staffing for a number of reasons because due to COVID, and kind of it's important to keep that going. We've gotten our own supplies for DEP to ensure that our work can continue. So I hope you guys are having equal success in getting the necessary resources. All of which I guess qualifies as the new normal, which would be after phase 4, or is phase 4. Anything else? No? Well, so one last thing that Larry Feldman last week had brought up that we should have a theme. And if you had seen my LinkedIn post, you would have known that the theme for this week was, what have you cooked for me lately? So we're going to, what have you cooked for me lately? I did bagels. I hope you're having, you're eating well, you're gardening, you're baking, you're cooking, you're out running, doing something for yourself, not just sitting in your home offices, but getting out and actually doing something. Take a vacation day, even if it is staying at home. Yep.
And I'm going to ask Jim DeCoulis, did you bring up the topic that was covered in tech practice yesterday about ventilation?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got in late.
No problem. That would be Andy Irwin, I take it.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Hey, Andy.
Hello.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, then we'll be back here next week. And hopefully we'll have more detail about what the phases will be, and we can, we will want to hear from you guys as we get more information, as we begin going through those phases. It's going to be important to us to identify kind of what expectations for site work and when, kind of what kind of work will fit in and what you think the LSP community and the consultants, the field workers will be able to achieve under these certain conditions and rules, and kind of what will still need enforcement discretion or flexibility, however you want to describe it, moving ahead. And I would reread your homework for next week, I guess, would be reread the guidance that we put out when it was, the beginning phases of the emergency, and we were looking at a lockdown, and what we will be thinking of and what we want input in is how do we begin to supplement that or modify it to reflect opening up and being able to do additional work and what those expectations will be. So we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for participating. Bye, guys.